My husband passed away, and my daughter inherited the house and $6 million. All that was left for me was a cabin. When my husband died, I thought the pain of loss would be the worst part. But what came after was even more cruel. When the will was opened, I discovered that my daughter had inherited everything: the house where I lived for more than 2 decades, all the family's money, and even the memories I helped build. To me, only an old cabin in the middle of the mountains remained, and a silence that screamed abandonment. I was judged, humiliated, and left behind by those I loved the most. In the beginning, I thought it would be the end. But that cabin, which seemed like the symbol of my failure, ended up becoming the stage for my rebirth. Today, my story is about overcoming, dignity, and silent strength. I'm happy you are here. Follow my story to the end and comment which city you are watching from. I want to know how far my story has reached. I entered Thomas Walker's office like one enters an ancient temple. The wood-paneled walls, the smell of old paper, the books stacked on shelves that almost touched the ceiling. Everything seemed loaded with a symbolism I did not fully understand. Robert always spoke of justice, of order, of doing what was right. I believed in him. The pain of loss still weighed on my shoulders, but there was comfort in the idea that he had taken care of me until the end. Upon seeing Rebecca already seated, my hope wavered a little. She did not look me in the eyes. Her posture was erect, her dress impeccable, her makeup cold. It was as if she were there for a negotiation, not for a moment of farewell. I approached with caution and sat beside her, watching Thomas prepare the papers. His face was closed, expressionless, like someone anticipating discomfort. There was something in the air that made me restless, a thick silence that screamed more than any spoken word. Rebecca tapped her fingers on the table, impatient, almost bored. Thomas cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and looked at me with a pause that seemed to last for minutes. His look was not of comfort. It was of warning. He slowly turned the pages and sighed before speaking. I saw his lips moving, but my hands were already cold before even hearing anything. Then he said with a cautious tone, almost paternal, like someone preparing the ground for an inevitable collapse, "Maybe you should sit down before we hear this." That paralyzed me. I was already sitting, but I felt the ground beneath me tremble. For an instant, I thought about getting up and leaving, running away from what was about to happen. But I stayed. I needed to know. I needed to understand what my tomorrow would be like without Robert. "Maybe you should sit down before we hear this." The reading began like any formal act, but there was nothing neutral in every sentence Thomas pronounced. The main property, all checking and investment accounts, and other movable assets remain in the sole possession of Rebecca Barnes. My eyes widened, my hands lost their strength. Rebecca did not even move. Thomas continued, "To the wife, Eleanor Barnes, the ownership of the mountain cabin will be transferred, with symbolic value." My body froze. That made no sense. That could not be true. A cabin? 25 years of marriage, of dedication, of choices made together. I was by his side in the worst moments, when his health failed, when work was tiring, when silence screamed. And all I received was a forgotten cabin in the middle of the woods? A symbolic inheritance, like someone handing out crumbs? No, it could not be. My head was spinning, and I could barely focus on the following words. Rebecca then crossed her legs and released a contained, poisonous, satisfied smile. It was the type of smile one does not learn, one inherits. Maybe she learned it from him. Maybe she realized at some point in life that power lies in controlling the narrative. While I digested that slap in the face, she smiled like someone winning an ancient war. A smile almost imperceptible but devastating. It was as if she knew everything even before I arrived. As if every gesture of hers there was part of a plan that was already in motion. A plan in which I never participated. My hands began to tremble. I wanted to get up, but my legs did not obey. The air seemed thin. Thomas closed the folder with a dry click, ending the reading as if sealing a coffin. Rebecca gathered her purse with elegance, ready to leave. She looked at me sideways and blinked, like someone savoring someone else's defeat. Rebecca smiles with superiority. I left the office stumbling. The sun outside seemed false, blinding, cruel. The voices from the street hit me like echoes of a world I no longer belonged to. Rebecca caught up to me in the parking lot and, as she passed me, dropped the sentence that sealed everything: "It is Dad's justice." That hurt me more than the entire reading of the will. the coldness in her voice, the certainty with which she spoke, as if he had condemned me with pride, with conviction. I thought about screaming, confronting her, asking why. But nothing came out of my mouth. The pain was greater than the anger. It was a pain of absence, of betrayal, of surprise. Like someone who discovers she was betrayed by her own shadow. I got into the car without direction, the steering wheel under my frozen hands. Rebecca got into her new car, with tinted windows, and disappeared as if nothing had happened. As if she had just gone to the bank or the salon. As if she hadn't just destroyed everything I was. I arrived home, or at what was left of it, with my heart dragging in my chest. I touched every object like someone touching it for the last time. And indeed it was. The sentence had been given. My destiny was traced. That house no longer belonged to me. My story was being packed in silence, between cardboard boxes and memories that no one wanted to keep. Rebecca passed me in the hallway, cell phone in hand, and said with a neutral voice, "Pack your things. You have 1 week." And she walked away. I sat on the sofa looking around for the last time. Everything I helped build, everything I was being erased without ceremony. And all that was left for me was a forgotten cabin, surrounded by tall grass and loneliness. I looked at the mirror and saw a woman I barely recognized. I stood up. It was time to face my new address. Your home is now a cabin in the back of the mountains. The 7 days passed like accelerated mourning. Every corner of the house said goodbye to me with cruelty. Rebecca not only removed me from there, but she also made a point of eliminating any trace of me. Photos, clothes, letters, everything was considered her property. I asked for at least my mother's pearl necklace, kept in the bedroom drawer. She refused. Those things now belong to me, she said, without blinking. As if memories could also be inherited by force. On the last day, she was waiting for me at the door with an impatient look. She handed me an envelope with the address of the cabin and a phone number for emergencies. "Don't call me for just anything," she added. My world was collapsing while she barely hid her contempt. No empathy, no hesitation. Just a woman fulfilling a carefully architected plan. I was an obstacle overcome. A closed chapter. And she wanted to erase me quickly. I took my suitcase, too small for so many years. The weight I carried did not fit in there. Rebecca accompanied me to the gate just to ensure that I really left. Before closing the gate, she looked over her shoulder and said with irony, "I hope the rats don't mind the company." I arrived at the cabin in the late afternoon. The winding road seemed to mock me, as if every curve was another reminder of my fall. The tall grass swallowed the dirt path, and the structure of the cabin revealed itself little by little, like an old and forgotten memory. When stopping the car, I hesitated to get out. The wood was dark, worn, as if it no longer wanted to welcome anyone. The door creaked loudly when I pushed it, revealing a dusty and cold interior. I took a deep breath before entering. The ceiling had cracks through which the late-day light entered in crooked beams. Humidity dominated the air. There was no power, no water, no furniture that deserved that name. The windows were warped, the walls stained with mold. I walked through the main room trying to find a less sad corner to sit. It was hard to accept that this would be my home. A woman who was a wife, a mother, a hostess of dinners, now lived among loose boards and the smell of abandonment. I opened the windows in an attempt to get the air circulating. Nothing seemed alive there. It was as if that house had forgotten what it was like to shelter someone. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall and left the suitcase beside me. The silence was so dense that even my breathing seemed like an invasive noise. I looked around and wished it were all a nightmare. But I was awake, abandoned, and alone with the rubble of a destiny I did not choose. Is this where I will spend the rest of my life? The night arrived without warning. No electric light, no candles, no voices. Just the sound of crickets and the wind blowing through the cracks in the walls. I wrapped myself in a thin blanket, sitting in a corner of the floor, hugging my knees like a frightened child. The tears came slowly, silent, almost apologizing for existing. I thought of Robert, of the man who promised to protect me until the end. Would he have done this out of conviction? Or was he deceived like me? The pain was double, that of loss and that of abandonment. Rebecca not only inherited everything, but she also made a point of erasing any trace of me. I felt small and visible. The cold seemed to come from within, more than from the environment. In the darkness, I closed my eyes and heard my own voice, weak but firm, "You are still alive." That was all I had in that moment. Life. Wounded but alive. Maybe there was still something to rescue inside me. The dawn was long but not eternal. When the first signs of light appeared through the cracks, I was still there, curled up, breathing deeply. Surviving that night was a kind of rebirth. I had fallen, yes, but something inside me did not want to die. A small but insistent feeling that pulsed slowly. It was the beginning of something new, although I did not know what. Something that still had no form but already existed. I stood up slowly with aching muscles, but with a heart a little steadier. I knew it would not be easy, but I also knew it was not yet the end. I closed my eyes for an instant and decided right there that my story would not end in that cabin. Either you are reborn or you die inside. I chose to live. The rumors arrived before the dust of the move even settled. First came whispers, sideways glances, then whole sentences, false sharp. Rebecca began to mold my image with hands dirty with manipulation. She told Nancy, Martha, and Helen that I was unstable, that I cried in corners, that I had become obsessed with money. She added that I drank in secret, that I argued with the walls, that I demanded inheritance as if it were a divine right. I was now the villain of the morning. Nancy, my sister, listened and believed. Perhaps out of hurt, perhaps out of convenience. Martha, always a gossip, spread it to the neighbors. Helen, with that corner smile, made a point of calling just to ask if I was taking care of myself. Every word was an invisible thorn. The image I fought my whole life to build was being disfigured from within the family itself. Rebecca knew where to strike. She did not seek only my physical expulsion but also social. She wanted to erase me from everywhere. I wondered how she managed to lie with such naturalness. How was it possible for someone to transform a mother into a monster so calmly? How far did the theater go? Or was that her true face, which I refused to see all these years? The pain of being betrayed by a child is like a cut without blood. You don't see it, but you feel it all the time. And while she smiled at dinners and phone calls, I was buried alive under versions I never chose. Then on a cold afternoon, while drinking thin coffee on the porch of the cabin, I received the call that confirmed everything. Nancy's voice sounded cold, distant, like someone speaking to a stranger. "Eleanor, I heard things. Maybe you need help. Some monitoring, you know?" My chest tightened. There I realized she was no longer my sister. At least not for now. "Your mother needs treatment." I spent hours staring at the cell phone after that call. I wanted to call back, scream, ask her to look me in the eyes. But something stopped me. A type of bitter resignation, the understanding that sometimes silence protects more than defense. I kept thinking about everything we had already lived, childhood, sharing confidences. We had overcome grief, losses, rebuilt affection so many times. And now she saw me as someone broken. Worse, she believed Rebecca's words. I took a deep breath, held back the tears, and whispered as if she could hear, "I am not crazy, Nancy." It was not a scream of anger, but a promise that everything would be clarified. I felt that there was still much behind all of this. Robert would not have left me with a cabin out of cruelty. There was something else. Something hidden, something that needed to come to light. I needed to strengthen myself. I needed to abandon not only the house but the version of myself that still waited for immediate justice. I decided not to bow to others' narratives. I was not what they said. And if my sister, my daughter, and my friends could not see that now, maybe one day they would. And if they didn't, at least I would maintain my dignity. The pain could not define who I was. The loneliness, however brutal, also revealed what remained firm inside me. And no one would take that from me. I was tired of explaining myself. I went back inside, faced my reflection in a dirty window pane. The woman looking at me was still standing, even with her heart in ruins. I didn't need to prove my sanity. I needed to live my truth until it spoke for itself. I am not crazy, Nancy, but you will see the truth. I kept all the old letters in a cardboard box. The photographs, yellowed by time, brought smiles that now seemed like lies. The dedications, the birthday notes, the love notes, everything seemed to have been written by someone who never existed. I went to the yard with the box in my arms and took a deep breath. It was time to say goodbye not only to the past, but to the version of me that still hoped to be saved by it. The flame of the improvised fireplace rose slowly. The first letters crackled like dry leaves. A photograph of Robert curled in the fire before disappearing. I cried. I cried without screaming, without sobbing, like someone releasing centuries of anguish. Every burnt paper was a part of the pain that I would no longer carry with me. It was my ritual of mourning, of rebirth. Not to forget, but to no longer live trapped in what does not return. There, in front of the ashes, I saw myself free for the first time. Free from the promises that were not kept, from the words that deceived me, from the ties that suffocated. The loneliness was cruel but also true. There was nothing left to pretend. Only the essential would remain with me, the memory of what I was, the courage to be what I can still be. There was nothing left to fear. I went back inside with the smell of smoke stuck to my body. I closed the door, sat on the bed, and closed my eyes. For the first time in days, I slept in peace. Now I only carry with me what no one can take away. That morning, the silence of the mountains was broken by an unexpected sound. A light knock on the wooden fence. It was Mr. Granger, the neighbor from the house further down, straw hat, hands marked by time. He brought a bag with apples and a curious look. He said he heard I was living there and wanted to welcome me. We talked a little, and he commented that Robert was a man of vision. Your husband was no fool. That land there has secrets. I thought it was kindness, one of those phrases without weight. But his look was serious. He said that years ago he had heard rumors that Robert had plans for that property, that there were interested geologists, discreet surveys. The reason was never known for sure. But he was certain that that land hid more than roots. I felt a chill go up my spine. Was this the reason Robert left me precisely the cabin? Mr. Granger tapped his hat, smiled, and walked away, leaving in the air a doubt planted like a seed. I went back inside and stood looking out the window. That land for everyone was just a forgotten landscape. But what if it wasn't? What if there was something there that even Rebecca didn't know? Something that explained his silence? An inheritance that was not in the will? For the first time, I allowed myself to think that I might not have been forgotten. That night I didn't sleep. Something was awakening inside me. An intuition that made my chest accelerate. I looked at the porch floor, at the loose stones, at the trees around. I began to believe that maybe the cabin was not just a punishment. Maybe it was a map. That land hides more than grass, Eleanor. The next morning, the porch floor creaked differently under my feet. One of the boards was looser than the others, and that caught my attention. I knelt carefully and, upon forcing it a little with a kitchen knife, it gave way. Under the wood there was a small dry space with packed dirt. In the center, almost buried, a small aged iron key. Picked it up carefully. It was cold, old, heavy, different from everything I had seen around there. I ran my fingers over its irregular surface. There was no paper, no clue, just the key, silent like an invitation. I sat on the stairs and kept observing that piece of iron as if it were going to speak. What door would it open? Was there any lock in that cabin falling apart that was still functional? Or was it just another reminder that Robert spoke in riddles even after death? I thought about keeping it, forgetting it, moving on with life. But something inside me did not allow it. I felt there was a purpose in that find. It wasn't placed there by chance. I knew Robert. I knew his hidden gestures, his habit of hiding car keys, notes, birthday surprises. That was his. It was his for me. And I needed to discover what he wanted me to find. For the first time, I felt I was in the right place. I stood up with the key in my hands and entered the cabin, determined to search every corner, every wall, every closet. What is this for? I spent hours turning the house upside down. I looked behind the furniture, under the boards, pushed closets, pulled old rugs. When I was about to give up, I found a part of the floor in the corner of the kitchen that sounded hollow to the touch. I dragged the heavy furniture that covered that part, and there, a rusty iron handle revealed itself. I pulled with force, the sound of old wood creaking like a muffled scream. Underneath there was a small stone staircase, steep and damp. The smell was of wet earth, moss, time. I went down with my heart racing, every step taking me deeper into something I did not understand. At the end of the stairs, a reinforced wooden door imposed itself before me. An old round lock seemed to await exactly that key. I took a deep breath. My hand was trembling. I inserted the key. It turned easily, as if it had been lubricated yesterday. A dry click echoed through the enclosed space, reverberating on the walls. The door opened slowly, revealing a gloom where the air seemed denser. There were boxes, papers, something covered by a sheet. Everything was intact, untouched, as if Robert had left that for me and only for me. I stood there, stopped on the threshold, feeling my skin prickle. I was about to discover something. I didn't know what. But my heart knew that nothing else would be the same after that moment. The click of the lock echoed like a hiss. I went down carefully, my eyes trying to get used to the gloom of the hidden compartment. The smell was strong, a mixture of mold, wood, and a forgotten time. In the center, a rustic table held yellowed papers, folded maps, and a small metal safe locked. Beside it rested an envelope with my name written by hand. I immediately recognized Robert's handwriting. Firm, serious, almost always controlled. The envelope was closed with red wax, sealed with the same precision as someone closing a secret. I sat down slowly and stared at that piece of paper as if it could bite. Breaking the seal was like cutting the past with my own hands. Inside, a long letter written in his own hand. The first lines were direct, without circumlocution. He did not start with dear, nor did he speak of longing. He just got to the point. If you are reading this, it is because she betrayed you. I felt my heart stop for an instant. He knew. He expected it. And somehow he prepared me for all of this. I continued reading with trembling hands. The handwriting was firm, without erasures, as if he had planned every word carefully. He spoke of doubt, of guilt, of the feeling that Rebecca was becoming something he could not stop. He told that he tried to find a way to protect what was ours without her being able to destroy everything. He said the cabin was a shield, not a punishment. A shelter that hid more than it seemed. A trap against greed. Around me, everything seemed too silent. The letter burned in my hands. Robert had left there more than words. He had left me a mission, an interrupted story, a piece of truth that only I could carry forward. If you are reading this, it is because she betrayed you. He recounted that years ago he bought rights to the surrounding lands, including the soil under the cabin. The letter described how he had rejected various proposals for exploration because he knew that should be mine, and only mine. He spoke of hidden maps, preliminary studies, of a possible deposit of precious stones. Rebecca loves what can be counted in figures. You, Eleanor, understand what is worth something inside, he wrote. My eyes filled with tears. It was like hearing his voice again, but for the first time with absolute sincerity. There he was, not the cold or distant husband, but someone who saw in me a strength that I myself had forgotten. Every line was a revelation. He asked me for patience, strategy, and mainly silence. The real value of this land is not in the minerals, but in what you will do with them, it said. It was as if, even absent, Robert was still deciding the next steps of my life. I folded the letter carefully and looked around. Now everything made sense. The choice of the cabin, the absence in the will, the deliberate indifference. He did not abandon me, he tested me. He wanted to see if I would sink or if I would be reborn. And by doing that, he gave me something Rebecca would never understand, an invisible, non-transferable legacy. I was the guardian of something much bigger than an inheritance. I was the heiress of a secret, and the responsibility for it. I looked at the locked safe. I still didn't know what was inside, but I felt that everything started there. I stood up with a restless but firm heart. You are the true guardian of our story. Beside the safe there was a smaller envelope with a key. I opened it carefully and unlocked the small iron chest. Inside, there were official documents, mineral property records signed and stamped, detailed maps of the region, points marked with precise coordinates. One of them, in small letters, carried a record of a proposal made by a foreign company, $10 million for partial exploration. Refused. The paper was signed by Robert, dated 5 years ago. My heart beat out of rhythm. It was all there, legalized, documented. The rights over the land, the possibilities of exploration, the estimated values. Everything in my name. I could, at any moment, transform that life of deprivation into a life of choices. But what held me was not the financial value, it was the weight of what that meant. It wasn't an opportunity. It was a test. And the decision now was up to me alone. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in months, I felt something different from pain power. A type of silent power, which demands neither screams nor confirmations. I was facing something that could change everything, but there was no one there to witness it. And maybe it was better that way. The world had turned its back on me, and now I held in my hands the key to rise again, or disappear for good. I needed to choose carefully. I stored all the documents, folded the maps, and closed the safe. I went back up to the surface with slow steps, like someone carrying a secret too heavy to be spoken aloud. The future is now in your hands. The next day, I scheduled a meeting with Henry Donovan, a lawyer specializing in property and mineral rights. He was meticulous, direct, and surprisingly discreet. I took everything: documents, maps, Robert's letter. He analyzed everything for hours while I watched silently with my heart stuck in my throat. When he finished, he crossed his fingers on the table and looked at me fixedly. "You cannot imagine what you have in your hands, Mrs. Eleanor." Henry explained that the records were in order, the documents protected by inviolable clauses. The will does not annul the mineral property contracts signed previously. Legally, everything was mine. Rebecca could never contest it. He seemed more impressed than I was. He said that few had access to a reserve with potential of that level. I asked him to speak quietly. He nodded, smiling. "Your husband was a genius. And you were stronger than you imagine." I asked for absolute discretion. I said I didn't want to move anything yet, that I needed to understand the terrain, evaluate calmly. Henry gave me the contacts of a trusted geologist and suggested an immediate technical study. I noted everything in an old notebook without using the cell phone. I trusted silence more than any technology. Before leaving, Henry looked at me one more time and said, "You are sitting on a mine of fortune." Days later, I received a visit from Dr. Leonard Shaw, an experienced geologist sent by Henry. With simple equipment, he spent hours studying the soil, collecting samples, analyzing strategic points. He was methodical, observant, and rarely smiled. When he finished, we sat on the porch of the cabin, he with an open notebook, me with a cup of cold tea in my hands. "I won't lie, Mrs. Eleanor. What is here is special." He spoke of rose quartz, of black tourmaline, of veins of deep amethyst. He showed on paper the estimates, the possibilities of profit, the environmental requirements. He said that, conservatively, there was between $10 and $15 million in gross value there, not counting royalties. I remained silent, trying to absorb it. The cabin, the grass, the rotting wood. Everything hid a treasure that no one imagined. Not even Rebecca, with all her thirst for control. I asked for time to decide. Dr. Shaw respected that. He said that the rarest thing was not what was under the earth, but who was on it and knew how to wait. I smiled for the first time in weeks, with a light taste of poetic justice. While the world saw me as a defeated woman, the earth beneath my feet said otherwise. I was just beginning to understand my place. He said goodbye with a firm handshake and a respectful look. I stayed there, sitting, feeling the wind touch my face, as if the mountains also recognized me. This changes everything. I negotiated in silence. I sold the rights for $12 million, with a clause for monthly royalties for 20 years. I did everything in the original name of the cabin, without fanfare, without altering my appearance. I continued wearing old coats, tending the vegetable garden in the yard, going to the market on foot. No one knew. Rebecca continued her life of ostentation and contempt. But I was now free. Free from depending, from asking, from keeping quiet. And more than that, I was invisibly powerful. I bought a new property in secret for the future. But I continued in the cabin by choice, not for lack of options. Silence became my shield, my shelter. I knew what I carried, and that was enough. There were still scores to settle, words to be said. But now I didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Just live with dignity and strength. At night, I sit on the porch and watch the sky darken. Time did not heal me, but it revealed me. And while everyone thinks I was defeated, I rebuild. With patience, with strategy, with courage. No one steals my story anymore. It is not yet time to reveal. But that day will come. And when it comes, it will be definitive. No one needs to know. Not yet. Rebecca appeared on the cover of a local magazine in a golden dress, trained smile, and a luxury car in the background. She circulated through events, took photos on trips abroad, frequented expensive restaurants with friends who changed every week. In the village, people commented in low voices, but their eyes said everything, admiration mixed with suspicion. After all, where did so much money come from? She didn't work, hadn't inherited companies. She just spent, showed off, won ephemeral applause. Pretending it didn't affect me would be a lie. It still hurt to see the daughter I raised transformed into a parade of appearances. But I kept quiet. I continued in the cabin, wearing modest clothes and buying bread with counted coins, even with millions hidden in the bank. Every ostentation of hers was a piece on the board. And I knew that games like this have an end. No one spends so much without return. No one wins when ignoring the basis of reality. But I preferred not to comment. One day, while buying vegetables at the market, I heard two ladies commenting, "It seems she sold her mother's engagement ring." My heart stopped for an instant. Later, a neighbor commented that Rebecca was trying to sell the beach house. Debts, they said. First 200,000, then 400. The pile of bills grew as much as the designer suitcases she paraded. Little by little, the shining image began to crack. The varnish of easy wealth was running. I returned home in silence, feeling the cold breeze touch my face. The cabin, although simple, now seemed firmer to me than ever. She had nowhere to lean, only facades. And facades sooner or later collapse. But where is all the money going? The news ran faster than the wind in the mountains. Rebecca began to disappear from events. The smiles vanished from the photos, the invitations became scarce. A mutual friend commented that she had canceled the credit card. Another said she was seen arguing with the bank manager. A rumor arose every day that she had lost a lawsuit, that she owed the condominium, that she had taken loans without guarantees. The glass castle was giving way. The same daughter who called me crazy now imploded under the weight of her own choices. And that gave me no pleasure, it gave me pity. Because behind her arrogance, there still existed a lost girl. But I knew she needed to hit rock bottom. Only then would she learn the value of rebuilding, not with money but with character. The external ruin was the reflection of the internal emptiness she cultivated. And now everyone was beginning to see. The looks that before judged me based on her words, now whispered about the prodigy daughter who lived in luxury and fell into disgrace. Martha, Helen, and even Nancy began to ask questions. The village has a short memory for glories, but long for bankruptcies. And Rebecca, who tried to erase my existence, now reappeared in conversations with tones of scandal. She had tried to rise on lies, and the fall was inevitable. I watched everything from afar without interfering, without correcting or denying. Time was my ally, and the truth my greatest inheritance. I didn't need to do anything. She was digging her own hole. Rebecca Barnes is sinking. My routine in the cabin remained simple, silent, and observant. I gathered herbs in the yard, made bread, read the books that still remained. Sometimes I thought about leaving, starting over again somewhere else. But something kept me there. It was as if that land, with all its harshness, was healing me. Every day of silence was a new brick in the construction of my identity. I was no longer the woman who waited for love. I was the one who cultivated self-love. I saw Rebecca's fall like a cloud dissipating. There was no pleasure in it, but there was justice. For months she made me seem like a hindrance, a defeated woman. Now it was she who couldn't hold her own masks. And still I waited. I waited for her to return. For her to knock on the door not as an heiress, but as a daughter. Not to ask for money but to tell the truth. Her pain one day would have to find the courage to reveal itself. Sometimes at night I wrote letters that I never sent. I wrote about what I felt, about what I lost, about what I still had inside me. The words liberated me. I was not a victim. I was a survivor. And more than that, I was a witness to a cycle that was finally coming to an end. I didn't need to expose anything. I didn't scream. I just waited. And deep down I already knew. She would come. One day when pride broke, when the makeup melted. When only the truth remained. And when that day came I would be ready. Her fall was just a matter of time. She arrived on a gray late afternoon, without warning. She knocked on the cabin door like someone who didn't know if she would be answered. When I opened it, I almost didn't recognize her. No makeup, sunken eyes, simple clothes, slow steps. She didn't smile. She just looked at me with a mixture of fatigue and shame. I took a step back, letting her enter. No words were spoken in the first few minutes. Just the sound of the wood creaking under her feet. She sat in the old kitchen chair, where I used to sew at night. She stayed there looking at the floor, avoiding my eyes. When she finally spoke, her voice came out low, almost childish. "I have nothing left, Mom. It was like hearing an echo from the past, as if the girl I once was were speaking back to me. My heart tightened, not out of pity, but knowing that she had finally stripped off the masks. I stood, leaning against the doorframe, trying to organize my thoughts. I had waited for that moment, but now that I was facing it, I didn't know how to react. She continued, saying she had lost everything: the money, the friends, the respect. She cried, but without a scene, just discreet tears of someone who has cried too much. She didn't ask for forgiveness yet, just help. Help to start over. Help not to lose herself completely. I have nothing left, Mom. I listened to her until the end, without interrupting. My heart wavered between pain and prudence. The mother's instinct wanted to hug her. The wounded woman's wanted to keep distance. Finally, I took a deep breath and asked, "And why should I help you now?" It wasn't a vindictive question. It was legitimate. I wanted to understand what had changed, what remained of truth in that relationship. She didn't answer immediately. She just lowered her eyes and let another tear fall. The silence that formed was stronger than any argument of the past. I watched the daughter who once betrayed me, now small, vulnerable, human. There was no more room for masks, and that, in a way, was already a beginning. I sat in front of her, letting time do what I could not undo: layers of pride. I would not be her savior, but maybe I could be her mirror. Show her what she refused to see. She wiped her face and tried to explain herself. She said she was wrong, that she believed in wrong things, that she lost herself trying to prove something to someone. But she couldn't say to whom. That moved me more than any request for forgiveness. It was the beginning of an acknowledgement, and that was rare, painful, but necessary. I had already waited too long. Now it was time to act with dignity, without revenge but with criteria. She looked me in the eyes for the first time in months, and I saw truth. And where there is truth, there is still a way. "And why should I help you now?" The request for help came with a choked voice. She needed money, time, guidance. But I knew that giving all that on a platter would be prolonging the emptiness. She needed to feel the weight of what she caused, not as punishment but as learning. Therefore, I proposed an agreement. I would help, yes, but under a condition that was worth more than any bank contract: that she acknowledge out loud who she was and what she made me go through. Rebecca widened her eyes, hesitated. She said she didn't know if she could. I looked at her firmly. "You always had the words to destroy me. Now I want you to use words to try to rebuild." I asked her to write a letter. Sincere, deep, without frills, and to read it in front of the family. It wasn't humiliation. It was reparation. Only then could we start over cleanly. She agreed amidst tears. For the first time, without resistance. I saw in her eyes that she didn't expect that she thought a tearful request would suffice. But this was no longer my time to yield easily. What she broke would not be rebuilt with a sorry. A real gesture was needed. Public. Transformative. And if she accepted, maybe there was salvation for both of us. She nodded slowly, picked up paper and pen, and said she would start right there. "First, you will write a letter of apology, and read it out loud." Rebecca arrived with swollen eyes, but a determined expression. She brought the handwritten letter in her hands and asked me for a little more time. I asked that before any reading we establish a commitment, a contract. I printed the document I prepared with Henry Donovan's help, a loan of $500,000 with low interest, but with 3 moral rules. She would have to work, ask the family for forgiveness publicly, and never try to annul the will. Rebecca read every line, without disguising the discomfort. Upon finishing, she dropped the pen on the table and stared at me. "This is blackmail," she said. I took a deep breath, maintaining the calm I built over the last months. I replied that it wasn't blackmail, it was dignity. If she wanted help, she would have to accept the process, not just the money. It is not about revenge, but about healing. Either we do this the right way or we don't do it, I concluded. She hesitated for long seconds, but she signed. In that moment, I realized she was more wounded than proud. Signing that paper was a surrender, not to me but to the truth. It was the first step of something new. Rebecca wanted help, but she also needed to rebuild her own value. And I, even cautious, was willing to offer the soil for that. Not for her to bloom in my shadow, but by my side. For the first time in years, I believed in that possibility. She folded the contract and put it in her purse. She looked at me with less arrogant eyes and said she would comply. Not for me but for herself. This is blackmail. On the following Saturdays, Rebecca started coming to the cabin to help. She planted, swept leaves, washed dishes, fixed drawers. In the beginning she did everything in silence, uncomfortable. But with time something in her was changing. She left her cell phone in her purse, appeared with her hair tied back in simple clothes. She asked where to keep the utensils, brought fresh bread from the bakery, even laughed at some of my stories. The transformation was slow but real. Something only time could mold. One day, seeing my hands cracked from the hoe, she said, "I never thought you were capable of this." I laughed and replied, "You didn't know me, daughter." It was then I realized that she never saw me as a woman, only as a mother, and a mother for her was someone available. Now maybe she was starting to see who I really was. Not perfect, but strong, independent, and mainly whole even after the pain. She began to notice the cabin, the plants that grew, the peace that inhabited there. She sat on the porch with me after lunch watching the birds. She spoke little but listened more. I answered calmly without rushing, like someone who knows it is no longer necessary to prove anything. Those meetings became more than an agreement. They became bonds. Little by little, her questions stopped being about money and started being about me. About us. And I watched everything with serenity. I still kept the secret of the fortune, but not out of fear. Out of wisdom. I knew that the revelation would only have value when she was ready. And she was still learning to listen to what she never wanted to hear. "I never thought you were capable of this." It was on a cloudy afternoon that we talked like never before. Sitting on the porch floor, with an old blanket over our knees, she asked about my marriage to Robert. For the first time, she wanted to know about the woman who existed before being a mother. I told stories, pains, joys, and regrets. She listened in silence with watery eyes. She confessed she felt guilty, that she didn't know how to repair everything. I replied, living differently from now on. In that instant, I understood that my mission with her was not to correct the past, but to open space for a future with truth. Rebecca was trying, and that by itself was already a miracle. I knew that one day she would discover the truth about the fortune, but now that didn't scare me. The most important thing was already happening. She was becoming a better person by her own merit, not by convenience. With time, Saturdays became Sundays, then Wednesdays, until being there stopped being a contractual obligation. It became routine refuge. Between one conversation and another, we exchanged more than words. We exchanged wounds that began to heal. She helped me water the plants. I helped her replant parts of herself. The accounts remained in order, but I didn't touch the money. It wasn't time yet. Because when the truth came, she couldn't find arrogance or expectation. She needed to find maturity. True love does not impose itself. It reveals itself. The truth has a time to appear. It was Christmas Eve. Nancy's house was full, like in the old days. Martha, Helen, some cousins, even old neighbors appeared. There was too much food, contained laughter and curious glances. I arrived calmly, without announcing anything. Rebecca was there, nervous, holding a folded sheet. I asked her to wait for the right moment. When everyone was gathered in the living room, she stood up. She said she needed to speak. And she began to read. The letter was honest, simple, and courageous. She told everything, the lies, the pride, the manipulation, the contempt she felt and now was ashamed of. She cried, remembering how she humiliated me, how she tried to erase my existence. She asked for forgiveness not only to me but to the entire family. She said she was not worthy of what she inherited, and that now she understood what really had value. Tears rolled from her eyes, and from mine too, and from almost everyone there. Nancy held a handkerchief. Martha sniffled discreetly. Helen whispered, "My God," between sobs. I said nothing. I just listened, because that moment was not mine. It was hers. It was the birth of a new version of the daughter I once dreamed of having. When she finished, the applause came, shy but true. I stood up and walked to her, without rushing, with a light heart. And I hugged her. A hug that didn't need words. There, in the center of the room, between Christmas lights and the smell of cinnamon, something happened. A wound closed. Not by magic but by courage. I am not worthy of my mother. After the letter, we didn't speak of the past anymore. All that mattered was the now. Nancy pulled me aside and asked for forgiveness for having believed in distorted versions. She said she always knew deep down who I was. That comforted me. The reunion was not euphoric but true. We had all aged, learned, lost, and found things again. And on that night, without anyone knowing, my greatest inheritance had been delivered. Not in money, but in character. I returned to the cabin with a warmed heart. I slept in peace as I hadn't done in a long time. In the following days, Rebecca remained present. More humble, lighter. She helped me, took care of the garden, wrote poems in an old notebook. She was a new woman, not out of obligation but by choice. And that was all I wanted. The money? It remained kept. Safe. Waiting for the right moment. And that moment would arrive, I knew. But now it didn't hurt to wait anymore. Months passed. Seasons changed. The flowers I planted with Rebecca bloomed. Our relationship was different. No debts, no contracts, just presence. I wrote every night in my diary what I felt, what I learned, what I forgave. And on one of those days I made a decision it was time to leave. Not out of anger, but for freedom. I left a note, short, loving, with a new address. When Rebecca arrived and didn't find me, she sat in the porch chair. She cried, but not like before. She cried in peace. Then she found the envelope. And in it the key to the new house. And a bank statement. And a final message. The true inheritance is character. A year later, Rebecca went to the new house. She had flowers in her hands. She rang the doorbell with a racing heart. I received her with a calm smile, hair tied back and firm hands. She entered, saw the elegant furniture, the discreet paintings, the light entering through the wide windows. And she understood. I was rich. I always was. But I never needed to show it. She looked at me in silence. I just hugged her. And offered tea. We sat at the table like two women who finally found each other. We talked about plans, about the future. She told me she intended to study again, work with education. I just listened, proud. Not for the external change but for the internal one. The daughter who once denied me, now is someone who desired to build. And that has no price. Nor inheritance. It is a choice. It is a decision of the soul. I showed her the contracts, the papers, the values. I said everything was safe but that the most important thing had already been passed on, values, conscience, time. She cried again. But it was another type of crying. Of relief. Of belonging. Of gratitude. I didn't need anything else. Just that moment. Of having turned things around without stepping on anyone. Without screaming. Without running away from myself. And then she read the last note I left. The true test was never about money, but about who you choose to be. The true test was never about money, but about who you choose to be. Now, I am curious about you who listen to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you gone through something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I am leaving on the end screen another story that you will also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. Until the next video.